All right, so this is the last video in a series of videos on chapter 2, right? And we're kind of coming upon some notions of definition. And that's where we're kind of building to. And yes, you will have to have homework in 2.3, which is very interesting homework. But it's one of those homeworks like chapter 1 where you learn a bunch of criteria of various technical vocabulary and how they apply to instances of what the terms are referencing, right? So we've gone over precision of language, the avoidance of ambiguity, and vagueness of terms and phrases. We've gone over how words have certain quality, a concept or a term has qualities that determine what it can reference in the world, right? So there's a sense or reference distinction, or a connotation and denotation distinction, or a sense and reference distinction, or an intension with an S and an extension distinction, right? So now we're going to move to 2.3. And we're, what I want you to take away from this one, and this is probably the most important section as to why I actually cover the technical vocabulary of definitions, is this unit right here, right? It's even given in the title, definitions and their purposes, right? And obviously, we're going to have some discussion over what definitions do, right? But interesting that we have a bold-faced term called definitions here, right? And we have definition for a definition. It's kind of poetic in a way, right? So a definition, right? In conformity with this latter position, we may define definition as a group of words that assigns meaning to some word or group of words. Fair enough, right? So a definition, right? We use words to mean a defined term. Yeah. We use other words to define what a concept is, right? And of course, it wouldn't be a logic class if we didn't make things a little bit complicated, even about such a basic concept, right? So, definitum, right? So let's just DEF, how's it spelled? INIENDUM, right? This is different than the definitins, or definitins, or however you want to say it, right? These are obviously Latinate terms. But the definitum is the word or group of words that's supposed to be defined. This is the object of definition, right? So the defined word, or the word defined, right? Make it simple. That's the object of, and the definines is the word or group of words that does the defining, right? Group of words that does the defining. Now, oftentimes, the reason why our logic book will go into these Latin-based definitions is because a lot of technical academic culture might also use them. So you need to know them, especially if you're in an educated space where other people went to, university, right? And someone says, oh, well, item is always like the object of receiving action in Latin. And the nins is always like the things doing the activity. So this is the words that define it, and this is the word to be defined, basically, right? Not too much there, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention because technical bold-faced vocabulary is also what will be on an exam. Now, the real strength of this unit is in giving us a bunch of criteria to talk about definitions, because definitions are just not the lexical definition of what you learned in high school is going to the dictionary. That's the lexical definition, right? But what I think most undergraduates transitioning in the fall, I'm making this video in the fall, so obviously it could be used in the spring, but I'm very conscious or aware of the fact that undergrads coming straight from high school sometimes have difficulty transitioning to college. And the thing about high school is they taught you that the dictionary definition is the most authoritative definition on the planet for some particular concept, even though each different discourse and each different major class will have disagreements over how technical vocabulary or theoretical claims should be defined. So it is, how do I want to say this, right? Like when someone says, girl, you basic, right? You a basic bitch, right? It's like using the lexical definition, right? So if you are taking an international relations class with a comparative politics textbook from Oxford University Press, and there's bold-faced terms about, you know, a state is a international state actor. You're not using the word state like we refer to Indiana as a state, right? You're not doing that. You're not using the word state in the same way that if you were taking a course in state and local government, because there's two levels of courses. There's, domestic American policy you'll take in political science, and then there's, the international relations discourse and comparative politics, right? If I'm writing a dissertation to compare the healthcare policies of the United Kingdom's National Health Service versus the United States combination of both private and public confusing mess, and I use the word state, I'm referring to the United Kingdom or I'm referring to the United States as a state, right? I'm going to be very precise with my terms at that technical level of discourse when I'm writing a dissertation in political science for a PhD. And also, and you might be like, Dr. Hackett, I'm just an undergrad. Well, no, if you're a political science major or you're in comparative politics 385, right, in the political science department, they're going to make the same demand of you as if, the elastic covering of my body. If I'm a nursing major, this might be referred to as skin, but it's definitely epidermis, right? So anyway, we'll see what I mean. So the first is stipulative definition. A stipulative definition assigns a meaning to a word for the first time, right? Stipulative definitions are kind of fun, because stipulative definitions might be, defining a word for the first time. They might have some novelty. They might not catch on, right? Someone had to stipulate what a Karen was before it all got on TikTok. Think about that, right? Oh, you're just a Karen, girl. Well, Or what's basic white dude, privileged white dude, same as Karen, right? Kevin, maybe? A Kevin? I don't know. Right, but someone had to define it first so that we all knew the connotation of that term, and then that connotation referred to how it would denote things in the actual world, right? So stipulative definitions, right? The need for a stipulative definition is often occasioned by some new phenomena or development. So we now have new language to refer to artificial intelligence as learning language modules, or LLMs, right? But LLMs weren't really a thing until, I don't know, past year or two, right? They were in beta testing versions. Our book gives a definition of a liger, right? Like a combination of tiger and lion is Tygon, or right, or liger, right? So, crossbreeding animals, right? Another use for stipulative definitions is to set up secret codes, right? So Operation Barbossa or Operation Overlord were different ways of referring to military operations in World War II. Now, so stipulative is just, we stipulate for the very first time. Lexical definitions, and a lot of people in marketing have to invent stipulative definitions, right? the word Gatorade was a combination of like gator, right, where it was invented at Florida State, actually, where they're the Gators, right? And then like thirst quenching drink, like lemonade, right? So they called it Gatorade. Lexical definitions. Lexical definitions are the most common, right? These are, what you might refer to as common use or dictionary, but they're common usage definitions, right? So a lexical definition is used to report the meaning a word already has in a language, right? Now, here's the interesting thing. I am going to skip the order, and I'm going to go to theoretical definition right now. There's a reason why, right? So theoretical definition assigns a meaning to a word by suggesting a theory that gives certain characteristics to the entities the term denotes, right? So a theoretical definition. Theoretical definition defines a word in relation to, I'm going to say like a theoretical framework. Theoretical framework that suggests characteristics of the defined term. So I've been using the word, the example state to refer to an international actor in political science. Our book uses the example of light as electromagnetic radiation. Right. Now, the reason I wanted to skip theoretical definition and lexical definition is it's the fall, and I want to give you a warning about definition papers in English. Now, I'm housed in the English department. I am not an English professor. But one of the common mistakes that people make, especially in academic writing, is to assume that the common usage definitions suffice for a level of discourse that is highly theoretical, especially at university. So the word state and international as an international actor in comparative politics or in upper division international relations, areas of discourse you can get a PhD in, are a lot different than what we might see in the dictionary. Of course, the theoretical definitions might, if the theory becomes uber popular, it might infect some sense of the lexical definition. But when your professors say, hey, you're using a dictionary definition, but we actually have a definition in our textbook written by physicists who understand that light, right, is a form of electromagnetic radiation that allowed us to unify. So radio waves are a form of EM, right? Visible light is a form of EM, right? And the advancement of thinking about light and radio waves as the same thing was an actual advancement in physics. Whereas before, like light, so, but the theoretical definition, so what happens is in English papers is that you substitute, or in upper division classes, you substitute the lexical definition because maybe you didn't do the reading or you didn't read that well, or you read some of it, but you're just kind of making shit up in front of your computer. And you use the lexical definition as a substitute for the theoretical. And this is a huge problem in academic writing, because in every specific class, we're actually asking you to do one specific thing, right? We're asking you to come up with a commanding understanding of a set of phenomena using the readings that we've assigned. And oftentimes embedded in those readings are reasons that we want you to learn the theoretical language rather than the lexical. So this warning about academic writing and formal academic discourse is something that I'm trying to sort of capture here by skipping ahead. Okay. Let's go back to precising definitions. Definitions might actually be used to add more clarity to an understanding of a particular term, right? So the purpose of a precising definition is to reduce vagueness of a word, as we saw in the first section of this chapter. An expression is vague if there are borderline cases in which it's impossible to tell whether the word applies or not. Words such as fresh, rich, and poor are vague. Once vagueness of such words is reduced by a precising definition, one can reach a decision as to whether the word is applicable or not, right? So for instance, so a precising definition removes vagueness by adding precision. Right, so here's an example. If we use the example poor, and we say poor is anything less than or equal to an income of 20,000 per year for a family of 4, right? So, you know, in economics, right, your precising definitions might often be quantitative too. You know, they can be quantitative, right? But giving a quantitative expression in an economics policy class about what poverty is, right, will help delineate what the social scientists are studying in particular, right? Are they studying poverty, and what do they mean by poverty? And obviously, if I use the word poor and didn't define it, right, there would be like third world abject poverty. And then there's also poverty in the context of the abundance of being part of the developed world, right, in terms of what it means for Canada and the United States to be poor. Maybe that's a different, and probably Canadian poverty is, you know, informed by more precising definition and context than it would be in the United States. So precising definitions might be contextually mitigated. It might be contextually variant, right? But it's understood that if I just said, oh, I study poverty, I'm like, well, what do you understand by poverty? I don't really want to give you a quantitative definition. Like that I would be like, you're not really talking about anything with any precision. And again, right, one of the reasons that one becomes an economist or listens to economists is because you might want to make investments and predictions and see how the market might behave, and you want to make an informed decision with evidence, right? And you need precising definitions to actually do that level of work, right? Persuasive definitions. Persuasive definitions, right? They do the work of persuading us, right? Or to put it more, the purpose of a persuasive definition is to engender a favorable or unfavorable attitude towards what is being denoted by the words, by the defined term. The purpose is accomplished by assigning an emotionally charged or value latent meaning to a word while making it appear that the word really has or ought to have that meaning in the language in which it's used. So persuasive definitions are actually the work of marketing, right? Now, marketing might just be legalized capitalistic deception in order to receive profits. They try to convince you, right, that Monster is better than Gatorade and it has, you know, better qualities to quench your thirst after a workout, or some other muscle drink, right, for, you know, post-workout rehydration and restoration, or whatever it might be. So now so abortion means the ruthless murdering of innocent human beings, or abortion means a safe and established surgical procedure whereby a woman is relieved of an unwanted burden. Both are actual attempts, right, to persuade, And, you know, in politics as well as in moral discourse, a lot of people are aware that what they call something is part of actually persuading you. So if you're actually aware that some people might be engaged in this type of definition strategy, they're not necessarily being theoretical or very clear, that there is some sort of emotionally charged intent to motivate you to think a certain way, right? And if you're a mass comm major or you're going to be a mass comm minor, you know, in comm studies, we might call this the language is involved in agenda setting, right? The language that's used and how it's framed is trying to get people to have an association with a particular term, right? So taxation means a procedure by which our Commonwealth is preserved and sustained, or taxation means the procedure used by bureaucrats to rip off people who elected them. Now, taxation is the process of taking money from people's earnings. That can either be positive or negative, right? You could associate taxation with clean roads. Wait, this is Louisiana. Never mind. Sorry, that was a cheap joke, right? But you get the meaning. And of course, the examples in the book are abortion, liberal, capitalism, taxation, right? Conservative, whatever it might be. So those are the types of definition, right? You can use words with an emotional charge, try to persuade people of that emotional valence or attitude, right? But this is a definition to convince people to have an attitude, toward the defined item, right? We're using our vocab previously. So you have stipulative definitions, you have theoretical definitions, you have precising definitions, and you have persuasive definitions. Now, the real question here is, which one is being asked of you in a particular class? Mostly, if I'm really being honest, right, it's some combination between the theoretical as the most important, but maybe the precising definition with some attention to the theoretical are most where academic discourse is. Now, I'm not saying that people will ignore the common usage of how a term applies, right? Because, you know, theoretical and precising definitions work in tandem, that maybe if we have a very educated, enlightened society, that these notions come in to filter into the lexical. But the lexical is the most basic. It's the most caring of all definitions, right? And when people can't see why it's problematic that they've used the usage definition as a substitute for a theoretical or precise definition that's required, that's usually where the student is not being a good student and not doing the reading or being an active reader to pay attention to how the terms are defined in the course that they're using them in, right? So, for instance, you know, a theoretical definition, we use these in philosophy all the time. If I were to say to you, mind is as non-physical, there's nothing in the lexical definition in my philosophy of mind unit, in my inner, that would give you the definition of unity of consciousness or thinking center of consciousness. Yet it's explicitly defined in the readings that I assign when we do philosophy of mind, right? Mind could be referred to as a non-physical soul. And for the Cartesian dualists, again, Cartesian dualism is probably not in the lexical definition. It's not here, right? But mind is something very specific to Descartes, as opposed to people who disagree with that theoretical definition. And so in the Intro to Philosophy course, you know, is the mind a soul or is it a physical neural network, right? Is consciousness real? Is it a thing that we can define? Or is it an illusion? It's not something that we actually can define because we just have this concept that refers to nothing. It has empty extension, so to speak, right? So you start to see, like, when you do readings in your other classes, what you need to know is that, you know, persuasive definitions might be used in political or marketing campaigns to convince people to have a positive or negative association with the term being defined. Precising definitions remove vagueness by getting more precise, usually by adding some quantitative or qualitative criteria to further be more specific, right? So if I said to you, the American people have a tendency towards individualism, when I say American people, right, do I mean people from North America and South America? Because in that sense, right, they're all American, right? The entire two continents were named by an Italian cartographer named Amerigo Vespucci. That's why we call it America. Some Italian dude drew a map, right? And of course, you know, if I said to you the American tendency towards individualism, am I using American only to refer to people of the United States? And does that refer to the dominant class of people who are in the majority versus some sort of another subgroup? Like, how do I define American? So if I said to you, okay, fine, American citizens are individualistic more than they are, you know, you would get a little bit more of a sense as to like what I'm really trying to convey. I'm making a qualitative claim about the mindset of American citizens, right? Does that mean that the individualist spirit that drew people here, that maybe even immigrated illegally, right? Are they individualists too? Maybe they should be included in some, you know, maybe we should not be so quick to say it's only American citizens that are individualistic. Maybe we could say, well, people who reside within the United States. And we've gotten a little bit more exact as we've gone down, right? So stipulative, lexical, theoretical, precising, and persuasive definitions, right? Hopefully you've enjoyed this little deviation. But again, you know, the big takeaway is that the lexical is not the end-all be-all of all definitions. And when freshmen make mistakes on their English papers, they think that there is no disagreement over the common usage definitions, even though you might have been assigned readings for a large paper that are making claims in the theoretical, right? So if you're in an academic class, and maybe you're in like an upper 200 to 400 class, the terms that you use and that you learn in the lower division classes in your major are assumed to be common knowledge, so that when you get up, right? So like when I took international introduction to politics in my political science major, the words for, you know, non-state actor and international and state, I learned those words fairly early in the lower division sophomore level classes of my major, and they never went away, right? So when I take courses in like American foreign policy, like international security, or I took international relations, all of those same terms applied, as well as learning some new terms. So you should never think to yourself inside your major that the course, that the language you're learning will not build for future understanding. And when students make the wrong move in reference to the vocabulary, they tend to conflate the lexical with all the other senses of definitions, right? But in the reading, if you read like an economist on poverty, right, they probably had some quantitative notion of poverty that defined the range of possible interpretation. Like they got really specific. They're like, well, we're only talking about American families who live in the Rust Belt states where the steel mills used to be, from like Pittsburgh all the way up to Detroit or something like that. And maybe they just studied, you know, Midwestern poverty. And they defined it very specifically in terms of its geographical location and level of income, right? And it's just not the word poor at that point. It's a very precise word, right? So the theoretical and the precising definitions should take hold, but outside the university, and maybe even inside the university, might be uncritically attached to a persuasive definition right? Or they might think the lexical is the end all be all of all definitions, but it's clearly not. Otherwise, you wouldn't be trying to expand your mind by attending university. Okay, thank you for attending the 2.3 lecture.